Good morning, Oxnard. It's been a few weeks since we did our program. I'm George Miller with citizensjournal.us. That's the address you can find us on the web, and on Facebook, Citizens Journal, Ventura County. Well, it's been a few weeks since we've done this show. We have a lot of new news. There was no city council this week, but there was a really big marathon session last week, and that's primarily what I want to talk about. But first, some good news. This week we had the annual Martin Luther King celebration and march, which started from Plaza Park, terminated at the Performing Arts Center, and we had a very good program there. Gerald Rivers was our keynote speaker. He's most famous for the many depictions of Martin Luther King he's done, literally dozens of theater productions over the years. And the MLK choir also sang and was directed by Mrs. Frances Williams and Tiffany Bradley. Over 600 people attended the march from what I heard from the police department sources yesterday, so it was one of the most successful ones they've ever had. This year was also a celebration concurrently of the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, which is a milestone act that enabled minorities to have much better ballot access than ever before. Now we get into some bad news. I've been going to city council meetings only about a year and a half, but I have friends that have been going for 30 or more years that have been following things continuously. And several of them are financial experts, people like Lawrence Stein, who ran for mayor last year, and also Jim Lavery, who's a professional finance guy. And they've been pointing out deficiencies in the finances of the city, claiming that the city is really broke. And of course, there was a lot of pushback on that. But since Greg Nightoff, the new city manager, came in, he commissioned a study, basically an audit, informal audit of the city finances by Mr. Bob Dice from Management Partners, which is the consultant that Mr. Nightoff brought in after he came on board. And Mr. Dice did not have a lot of good news for us. Basically, he predicts that based on the current vector, the current spending plan, we're going to have approximately a $3 million deficit in the general fund this year, which is a little bit over $100 million. That's pretty serious, but that's the good news. The bad news is that it does not include salary increases, it does not include additional pension fund contributions, it does not include a major increase in infrastructure spending that we need for the wastewater, water, and road facilities, which combined are several $100 million. Does not include quite a few other things, so it could easily run double or more. That doesn't mean that the city will have to borrow it this year, because we do have a reserve, but that reserve is already inadequate for the targeted level of 15 to 18%. So the city has some financial problems. So this year's budgeting process will be very interesting, because there'll be more forced choices probably than there were last year, which was basically a continuation of a 2-year budget. Now we're on a 2-year budget cycle, so it's a different story. So that's the first item. During that process of the meeting last week, Mr. Greg Nightoff managed to mention that he has hired a new interim finance director who replaces Jim Cameron, who recently announced his retirement. And that gentleman is Dave Millicam. Dave came from Stockton, which created a few chuckles, because as you know, Stockton's going through a bankruptcy. He hastened to tell us that he was brought in to work out of the bankruptcy, that he didn't cause it, so we hope that's true. But he seems like a pretty knowledgeable guy. I spent about 15 minutes talking to him about some items I had discussed before, and he sounds like he knows what he's talking about. Another major change, actually several changes being made in the city organization. Matthew Winnegar, who's been around a long time, a lot of people know, in the Planning and Development Department, his retirement was announced. He's 60 years old, he's leaving as well. So that's quite a few people so far. We've had Karen Burnham retire recently, Michelle Tellers, the HR director, for reasons unspecified, but which we've read a lot about, and I won't talk about right now. Jim Cameron, of course, the finance director, has left. Rob Roshanian has been taken out of his position and put into a new streets department, and they're now trying to recruit a new utilities director. Of course, the city is also looking for a city attorney, but that position does not report to Mr. Nightoff. It reports directly to the city council. So the city council is doing that recruiting, and it's moving through the same consultant being used for other as well. Another very interesting development, I think I didn't talk about it because we didn't do the show the last couple of weeks, is that Assistant Police Chief Scott Whitney was transferred, and he is now the Assistant City Manager, Interim City Manager. I'm told that's only a temporary transfer, it's not a trial transfer, but we'll see. But from my work with the police department, I've noticed that Mr. Whitney has extraordinary people skills and organization skills. So he could probably do either one, but he's very valuable in his existing position in the police department. But the police department has a lot of depth. There's some very good people there, such as Assistant Chief Benitez, Commander Eric Sulingstad, and of course Chief Williams, who's extremely well-versed in police matters. Another major thing that happened last week is the discussion of the HUD Grants, that's the Housing Urban Development Grants. And I was surprised to find out that the total, roughly $3 million, that are allocated for the purposes of extremely low income and homeless people. And mostly what the discussion was is how to spend the money. You know, the money is already allocated. It's somewhat under $3 million, but there was not anywhere near consensus on how the money should be spent. Because that money could be spent for various types of housing subsidy programs, temporary housing, and homeless programs, and it can be divided between hard and soft expenditures. Hard meaning for actual real estate, bricks and mortar, and soft expenditures be things like training programs, rehabilitation programs, and things like that. So a whole bunch of constituencies got up to state their case, and probably the best thing you could do is read our article that we published on the meeting from last week on citizensjournal.us. And you can also, it also links to the video, so if you'd actually like to see the discussion and the many speakers, you can see it for yourself on the city video or go in via the link on citizensjournal.us. But just to give you an idea of some of the speakers, a sampling, Rose Vallejo, a resource services coordinator for Oxnard, feels that job training and continuing education are key. Rather than subsidize the homeless, she says, hey, let's eliminate the need for the subsidy by bringing these people up and give them the skills that they need that they might not have had an opportunity to get through their economic circumstances and stuff like in the past. Now, Tim Hawkins, the Community Action of Ventura, which is a nonprofit, says the homeless is getting worse, not better. He thinks that we should keep the transition center open, try to do more with less, prioritize the homeless services on what's the biggest bang for the buck, which he didn't specify when he talked, and provide micro-housing. This is kind of a revolutionary proposal. What micro-housing is very small housing units, 200, 400, 500 square feet at the most. And he even suggested using cargo containers. I mean, sounds a little third world to me, but it's probably better than living on the street. I mean, I'm not going to write it off till I hear more what he has to say, but I've seen some amazing cargo container homes in the past. So Francine Casanone said that emergency vouchers are lacking. If a shelter is open and rep is present, that can be done on the spot. Other speakers noticed that with tens of millions of jobs being exported out of the country, while we simultaneously bring in tens of millions of immigrants, we're going to have a job deficit no matter what we do. We need to address the underlying problem. We're not going to solve it with Band-Aid programs like these, no matter how much money the federal government pours in. Also last week, 3 major water recycling programs were approved, all in 1 week. The first one is construction of a pipeline for salt water to take the salt water out of when water is recycled. The second is to deliver water to new customers that have recently signed contracts. And the one contract is between the City of Oxnard, United Water Conservation District, Pleasant Valley Water District, Howling Nurseries, Saltonstad, and Reader affiliated companies. That was approved last week. The second one is basically a professional services contract for the design of the pipeline that I mentioned, and that was awarded to Jensen Design and Survey in Ventura. And the last one was to approve what they called a mitigated negative declaration regarding implementation of groundwater recovery and enhancement program. And I can't honestly explain what that is, and they didn't cover it on at the meeting, they just voted yes. So maybe I owe you more information on that. We also found out that $200,000 more in Department of Homeland Security funding is coming. And there really wasn't any debate on whether to accept it, they just voted yes. But just to give you an idea of what it covers, is roughly $75,000 for urban search and rescue equipment, $20,000 to regional training, $75,000 to a hazmat task force, which after the spill recently it becomes more important than ever. There's probably $6 million worth of damage from that waste facility spill a couple of months ago. And $9,000 to Oxnard Fire CERT training, which I'm actually a beneficiary of because I'm a current attendee of the CERT program, which is actually tonight They're running concurrently both an English and a Spanish cert training program, which will culminate around February 15th. And if you're interested in signing up, you can call the fire department at 385-7722. Ask to speak to Norma Hernandez, who can get you signed up for the next class. Now, what is CERT? CERT is basically emergency response training for municipal areas, and what it does is it teaches you the basic skills of what to do in a major emergency, such as earthquake, fire, flood, riot, tsunami, or whatever. And they actually cover all those different topics, by the way. And the instruction is very creative and entertaining. I won't give away the secrets of what they did, but they did some very interesting exercises in the first class that kept everybody awake and focused, and it was very relevant. We had the new coordinator for the fire department was hired last year and reactivated what was basically a dead program, and 2 members of the fire department who are actual instructors. And this week, I understand we're going to learn how to actually put out fires, and we're going to learn how to do first aid, quite a few different things, all covered in this 5-week program, which I highly recommend. And Mayor Flynn says that we only have about 100 people trained on the CERT right now in a city of 200,000 people. That's nowhere near adequate, and they would like to get a lot more trained. This class I'm in right now was an absolute sellout. There was standing room only. There were 35 people in a room designed for 20 people. So there's a lot of demand right now for that. So those are the things I wanted to cover this week. I'd like to keep this thing short enough. And if you'd like to get more detail, go online to citizensjournal.us or our Facebook site, Citizens Journal, Ventura County. So with that, I'm signing off till next week. Good morning, Oxnard. How you doing?